Would you say this is the most serious year that we've had in the last decade?
Yeah, definitely. It's a year of reckoning, definitely. It's a year of I think a lot of people are really thinking very closely, what's my next move? What should I do? And it's been because of all these different forces playing at the same time. This perfect storm that we're seeing, that people are starting to realize. And you start to see people say, hey, I don't want to be in coffee anymore, which,
I've heard a lot of that this year.
Yeah.
A lot of that this year.
And you didn't hear that in the last 10 years. It was like, coffee, great, I'm having fun. But this year people are saying, hey, I do want to leave coffee. And that is, for an industry that's very tight-knit, that is very, very, difficult to see that, there are people now saying, hey, I don't want to be in coffee anymore.
Map It Forward is starting a monthly online video discussion group for serious people in the coffee industry for just $20 a month. If you're looking for a place to connect with other individuals and explore a wide variety of topics about the challenges and solutions needed to navigate the many layers of the coffee crisis, this is for you. This space is a new feature for our top tier patrons in our Patreon community. Who are the kinds of people who are already signed up to be a part of this group? Think of the people who are guests on this podcast, and that should give you an idea of the caliber of what to expect. This is not a panel discussion. This is a direct, open discussion group facilitated by me. A great place to network, a great place to explore ideas, a great place to come up with solutions. To join this supportive and engaging monthly online meetup, head to patreon.com/mapitforward and choose the $20 tier. For details, check the show notes. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 1 of a brand new series, a sort of follow-up series to our very first series for 2025. Joining me in this series is Alejandro Cadena from Caravela Coffee. We started the podcast off with a bang this year with our conversation with Alejandro. We are revisiting the series that we had, and we are talking about how things that we discussed back then are playing out. So Alejandro, welcome back to the podcast for, I think this is the 4th time that you've been on the podcast, 2nd time this year. So welcome back.
Thank you, Lee. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
The pleasure is all mine. I am very interested to hear what your thoughts are about this, because in this episode, we're talking about the year in coffee so far. So when you came on the podcast earlier this year, you had some very interesting insights that a lot of people took a lot from. And a lot of people made decisions based on some of those insights. Some people ignored them. 2025 has definitely not been a boring year for any of us. And I guess where I want to start the conversation is, how would you sum up 2025 so far? We're recording this on the last day of September. How would you sum up the year so far in coffee?
Well, it's certainly been a wild ride. We've seen the highs, we've seen some lows, and now we're back up again in the highs. It's been a wild ride in all senses, not just market-wise, but I think everything has been wild. And I think I did mention in the podcast the word uncertainty. I think that's the word that has really been playing in all sorts of shapes and forms, right? And I think that's the word that will continue to be in our mind for the next, I would say, at least six to 9 months ahead. I think we'll continue to see a lot more uncertainty, which is, in a sense, interesting, because that uncertainty creates opportunities in my mind. But it's also, for a lot of people, it is creating a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. So I get the point that people might see uncertainty as a bad thing. I think if we embrace uncertainty, I think we'll be better off. But that's a hard thing to ask. I'm probably asking too much.
I've often thought throughout this year that what we're experiencing is good for us. as an industry. I'm really aligned with you in the sense that uncertainty isn't a bad thing. From your perspective, why do you think that uncertainty is working in our favor this year?
I think for too long, and I think I also mentioned this in the past, for too long it was too easy. And I say it from my personal experience and Caravela's experience. You start to get into this comfort zone, right? Which is good in the sense that you feel that everything's working. You don't have to do a lot of effort, and you kind of get into that complacency mood that that's it. I've hit the jackpot. There's nothing else to do. So to me, this kind of uncertainty really has created an opportunity to rethink many things, many things, and fundamentally, I think it creates a new benchmark. What I think and I hope we'll see in the future is today, $2.50, even $3 is not that difficult to fathom. A year ago, even $1.50 was difficult to fathom, right? So I think we're reframing the conversation, and I think I personally am starting to see that the conversations are much easier. People are now getting used to the new reality, and those who are kind of embracing the uncertainty and saying, well, I need to control what I can control, and I have to forget about what I can't control. I think those people will start to find a way out of the craziness of the last few months.
Have you found that there is a particular part of the supply chain or the different stakeholders that experienced 2025 with more intensity than any other part of the supply chain? Or do you think it's been ubiquitous across all the stakeholders?
Well, I can't say much about the last mile, the cafes, the shops. Yeah, I think if you talk to consumers, they are seeing inflation in coffee, so they are seeing it. However, I think consumers are the ones that are getting it better in the sense that if you like coffee and you still want to have the experience, they're willing to pay up. So I think the ones in the middle, which are the traders and generally us in the industry, the traders, are the ones that are feeling the pinch more because, of course, there's been constant effects. It's not only about the rising market, but it's also about the need of way more financing. So it's not only that it costs more, is that you need a lot more money, and then there's the ripple effect of margin calls, and that requires even more money. So I think the traders in general have been feeling the pinch a lot more. I have no idea how everybody's faring. I guess that we're all in the same position, that it's been a very difficult year financially and very worrying in the sense that you every day you need more money, and it just compounds and compounds, right? I think in general the roasters always have an avenue, right? They bought expensive coffee and now they can go to cheap coffee, and for the most part consumers don't notice the difference, right? So they always have options. I think we as middlemen have very few options because we don't control the entire supply chain. We don't have access to the final consumer. And so that creates a little bit of difficulty in the sense that you lose one customer and you might lose a lot, right? If you're a cafe, you lose one customer, that's fine. But, if you lose a lot of your customers, then you're in deep trouble. But in the trading world, you use one or two customers and you could be in a difficult position. There's not a lot of roasters out there, especially not a lot of roasters willing to pay high prices for coffee. So, every loss, it really counts. Well, I think the losses in cafes, one is not too much, a problem. And, maybe roasters as well, they do have big customers, and especially if you're too focused in grocery, you're probably having a really bad year because grocery channels is a killing.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that the impact that is being felt in the middle of the supply chain has actually trickled down the full extent that it is going to trickle down, which leads me to another element of this year that I'm very interested to understand from you, which is geopolitics, and in particular, Trump.
A good trend.
I'm, well, that's the trend of all trends, right? So I'm not convinced that the consumer has felt the full effects. And I'm not convinced that they will feel the full effects of the tariffs for quite some months yet. What do you like? Did this year and arguably tariffs are some of the important things that have happened. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about the forces that have caused the volatility. But what role did geopolitics play in coffee in 2025, do you think?
I think, as we've seen it, I think it has played a big role. Not only Trump, but Europeans have the UDR as well. So there's plenty of geopolitics going on, and of course there's also wars everywhere in the world. So that's also geopolitics, right? And that is causing trouble. Just talk about what happened after the Ukraine war with shipping routes. And what's been happening with the Israel-Palestinian conflict. That's also hampered a lot of business and trade routes. So I think geopolitics is more than Trump. It's a big theme, and I think it will continue to be a big theme. I think the world is in a state of flux that you can't discount anything now. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more issues in the next 5, 10, even 20 years. We're in a new state, completely unknown to the world, because it's no longer like it was in the Cold War. Now there's a lot of conflict everywhere, and for different reasons. So, and I think that's going to continue, unfortunately. So geopolitics is going to continue to be a massive force. Just look at when you look at what's happening with the tariffs. It's not the U.S. against the world. It's actually U.S. against the BRICS.
Yeah. I'd never thought of it that way, but that's 100% right. And from, I don't want to go into a political conversation. I mean, I'd love to, but don't get me wrong. But I think that a lot of these forces are happening because the BRICS are the first real challenger to the US in a very legitimate way. And they don't do business the same way as the US does.
That's right. Yeah. And if you look at it, the BRICS are spread all over the world. It's not, Europe, the US anymore. It's Asia, no. It's Latin America.
It's where I am,
it's
the Middle
Africa,
East.
It's the Middle East. It's like, it's a massive, altogether the BRICS are a massive, amount of population and economic power. So it is, it will continue to be a big issue. And, as long as we have, governments and leaders that are looking for more and more power, instead of, trying for the world to be better off, but concentrating more power in their neck of the woods, I think that's what we're seeing everywhere. That's the name of the game. It's not just Trump. It's a lot of our leaders.
And it's funny how connected it is to coffee, right? Like people are looking at Brazil and the tariffs, and they're saying, but America doesn't grow its own coffee. So why won't they just remove these tariffs from Brazil? And it ties back to Bolsonaro, and it's about more than just food and coffee and agriculture. And this is tied back to, he's my mate and I don't want him to be in jail. I don't want him to get convicted. So let's tie it to this thing that I don't know any other leader that would be so obvious about stating that through Truth Social and saying the things that he's saying. I don't understand anything about anything anymore is basically what I'm saying. I cannot tell you how many times I've said that this year.
You're describing uncertainty in a different way, but that's what it is. It's uncertainty.
Yeah.
Whatever anybody thinks today, it's can change tomorrow.
And in a year like 2025, do you think that kind of uncertainty is the kind of mirror that is going to help our industry? Or do you think, like, I know it's good for my business, I know it's good for your business, I know those who have built well and have built over an extended period of time, this is a year that you're prepared for. But on an industry scale, What does a year like 2025 look like as our industry from what you've observed?
That's a very tough question. I, you see all sorts of different things in the industry. There's, as you said, companies that are well run, managed, and have a long term view, while you see other companies that are, had a very short term, very opportunistic kind of view. They're in the worst position probably of all. The ones that are a lot more long term, because they built the systems and the capital behind them to withstand these kinds of storms, are in a much better position, definitely. But I think in general the industry has more characterized itself as being more the first, that the short term view, we'll figure it out as we go. Let's just have fun, basically. Very, very, very simply put, we're having fun, and as long as we're having fun, everything's fine. When things, when shit hits the fan, things change very rapidly. And I think, in general, we see that there's a lot of coffee companies at all levels that was just about having fun. It's a great industry. You get to travel, you get to meet with like-minded people, and parties and good times, right? I think the more professional, more long-term view are facing a much better time than those short-minded and very lifestyle-focused, if you will, brands.
Would you describe 2025 as a serious year compared to, let's say, the last decade? Would you say this is the most serious year that we've had in the last decade?
Yeah, definitely. It's a year of reckoning, definitely. It's a year of I think a lot of people are really thinking very closely of, what's my next move? What should I do? And it's been because of all these different forces playing at the same time. This perfect storm that we're seeing, that people are starting to realize. And you start to see people say, hey, I don't want to be in coffee anymore. Which,
I've heard a lot of that this year.
Yeah.
A lot of that this year.
And you didn't hear that in the last 10 years. It was like, coffee. Great. I'm having fun. But this year people are saying, hey, I do want to leave coffee. And that is, for an industry that's very tight-knit, that is very, very difficult to see that, there are people now saying, hey, I don't want to be in coffee anymore.
Unfortunately, this year I received a lot of messages from people saying, I thought you were a doomer. I thought that you were catastrophizing. I thought that you were being dramatic when you started warning about 2025 and that you said that there was a coffee crisis coming. And those same people are saying, I wish I had have listened to you because I'm going out of business now. And just for the record, folks, I'm not happy that I'm right about this. This is not something that I'm happy about. I think that the uncertainty that's turned up this year is a good wake-up call for all of us to reassess how we're participating in the economic structure around coffee, but also the social structure around coffee, and how unbalanced those two things are as we wait. The weight that we give to the social structure around coffee as an industry versus the economic structure that we have around coffee as an industry and the business structure, I'm not sure that they're balanced enough. Not even close. And I think that the uncertainty of this year is smacking everyone against the face and saying, wake up. So go ahead, please.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
You mentioned balancing, and that's something that has come to my mind a lot lately, especially because of the Brazilian tariffs, the 50% tariff. If you think about it, what that tariff has done is what the industry has never done.
Say more on that.
It balances the price.
Except the money isn't and it's such an amazing point, right? The reaction to that, just adding 50% like that, people have to make this decision, first of all, do I pay that? And second of all, how come the question comes, how come I can pay that? Or how come you can pay that when the money's going to go, you're forced to pay it for a tariff, but you can't pay it when that money's going to go to the farmer.
Absolutely agree. But at least it makes the buyer aware that there was...
They can do it.
Yes, that there is, that they can do it, right? And it doesn't happen. And they, for the first time in a long time, they say, well, guess what? I don't have to buy Brazil. Because that's what people would always say. I have to buy Brazil. That's what's happening. Right? But now it says, I don't have to buy Brazil. That's the leveling that I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
You're completely right. The tariff is not going to those that deserve it, yes, but it changes the mind, and that's huge.
Mm-hmm. It's forcing people to consider something other than Brazil just because Brazil's easy. It's not accessible, and it puts everyone on a even playing field now,
right?
Of sorts.
And I know it's not great if you're a roaster. I totally get it. I don't want to. I don't think it's. I'm not happy for roasters that they're having to pay more for coffee, but I'm happy for all of us in the sense that something completely alien, nothing to do with coffee, is actually doing what the industry on its own should have figured out 100%. A long time ago.
Well, and I mean, that is such a 2025 thing, right? Like something coming out of nowhere that kind of forced us to do something that we all needed to do. As we record this on the 30th, the last day of September, I'm very aware that there are still too many months in 2025 for us to be thinking about, 2025 taught us this and 2025 taught us that. I feel like 2025 is going to say to us, hold my beer. We're not done yet. And on that note, folks, we are going to head into the next episode. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about the forces that defined the volatility of 2025 so far. So join us in the next episode. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. This episode is part of a 5-part series produced by Mapper Forward. Check the full playlist and guest details in the show notes, as well as how you can support our work in the coffee industry. Become a premium YouTube subscriber, explore our Patreon and any brands we've partnered with to bring you this podcast. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us grow our audience.